To help introduce us to the writing of Shakespeare, as well as continue our discussion of poetry, we're going to be looking at sonnets, which are poems with 14 lines and 10 syllables in each line. I think this will be a good introduction to his voice before we get immersed in it through the plays. And moreover, paying close attention to a shorter work allows us to focus more on the individual words and phrases before having to interpret plot and theme from a larger play. This also gives you the opportunity to utilize sonnets in your own creative poetry writing. Many sonnets will explore themes in typical and fantastical human lives: love, war, the meaning of life and death. These are things that you may think about on a day-to-day basis, and sonnets provide an outlet to express the sometimes inexpressible. They are also not challenging to write. You may not be a master sonnet writer right away, but they give us a pretty unique and efficient style in which to write poetry, and you can really write a sonnet about anything. Sonnets have 5 very specific characteristics, 5 guidelines for their construction, and these are going to be your guidelines as well. First off, sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. The best way to look at this is to break this phrase down into its roots. Iamb means 2 syllables, penta means 5, and when you combine it with meter, which means rhythm, you get 5 rhythms. So iambic pentameter is 5 rhythms of 2 syllables. So you wind up with 10 syllables in each line. This is the name for the rhythm given to sonnets, representing its very structure. An iamb is a rhythm of 2 syllables. The first syllable is unstressed and the second syllable is stressed. So you would say every 2 syllables in a kind of up and down fashion, like declines, untrimmed, southwest, train stinks. So gangsta, I'm so thug. Here's an example of how this works in a Shakespearean sonnet. This is from Sonnet 18, one of his most famous. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. See, we just read it in sort of that up down rhythm. It does get a little sing-songy with kind of the da-da, 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 da-da kind of rhythm, but this should make them a more enjoyable experience when you first begin to read them. The rhythm will help you absorb the words in the same way that a melody in a catchy song will help you absorb lyrics. The next expectation of a sonnet is to use only 14 lines. The 14 lines allow for some creative breaks in traditional sonnets. Our example is a Shakespearean sonnet. It has 3 quatrains. A quatrain is a group of 4 lines, like we just talked about. That was a quatrain, a group of 4 lines, followed by a couplet. A couplet is a group of 2 lines. So basically you're going to have 3 groups of 4, so 4, 4, 4, then 2. 3 stanzas of 4 lines, like we saw before, and a short 2-line stanza at the end. All of Shakespeare's sonnets are broken up this way. Let's take a look at an example. So you see we've got the 3 quatrains here, 3 stanzas of 4 lines each, and the small 2-line couplet down here near the bottom. A rhyme requires matching sounds at the end of a pair of lines. A sonnet has 7 sets of rhymes. So 14 lines divided by 2 matching pairs equals 7 rhymes. Let's take another look at Sonnet 18. We can see that its rhymes are switching off every other line on and on down the poem until we get to the last matching pair in the final couplet. We typically use letters to indicate matching rhymes. It's a bit of literary algebra. For instance, the rhyme scheme of quatrain 1 in Sonnet 18 is as follows: A, B, A, B. And you would go on to the next lines with C, D, C, D, and E, F, E, F accordingly. You can see it here in Sonnet 18. But sometimes a rhyme will look imperfect in a Shakespearean sonnet. For instance, quatrain 1 of Sonnet 18 has this rhyme scheme. The 2 rhyme sounds are there, with A representing the A sound and B representing the 8 sound. We would typically pronounce temperate as temperate, but in this rhyme scheme it is pronounced temperate. It is called a slant rhyme. Sometimes the sound of the word will be adjusted to fit the rhyme scheme, and it is up to the reader to find out how each of these lines rhyme. Every sonnet also needs what's called a volta. The word volta is the Italian word for turn. Placing a volta in a sonnet is the most difficult part for many people. To help visualize a volta or turn in your sonnet, think of this. It's like you're walking through a field and at some point you may decide to change direction by turning. You might turn one small degree from your previous direction, or you might turn all the way around, doing a 180 and heading in the opposite direction. The same thing happens in sonnets. Where the turn comes in a sonnet also depends on what type of sonnet you're attempting to write. In a Shakespearean sonnet, the turn usually comes at the 9th line. So this means that that turn is going to come at the beginning of the 3rd quatrain. This gives the sense that the sonnet has built to sort of a point before being brought home to its ending. An easy example of a turning point would be lines 1 through 8 ask a question or series of questions, and lines 9 through 14 answer the question or questions. The turn might be in the theme of the poem, the sound of the poem, the emphasis or message or image of the poem. And since sonnets end with that final rhyming couplet, 2 lines at the very end that rhyme with each other, it ends up being like a wave building up, rolling in, and crashing into the shore. Finally, we're here at the 5th characteristic. Sonnets must be called sonnets. Many of Shakespeare's are just numbered, like Sonnet 18. So if you write one, it must use the word sonnet in the title. The name sonnet comes from the Italian word sonnet, which literally means little song. And if someone reads your sonnet and says it's really sing-songy, you can tell them that's the way it's supposed to be, because it's a little song. Everything about the sonnet lends itself to music, the rhymes, the rhythm of the iambic pentameter, the volta. Perhaps the simplest way to write a sonnet is to read a few sonnets and mimic what you like about them. After a few sonnets written in this fashion, you'll find that iambic pentameter and the rhyme structure and everything else about writing a sonnet will come much more easily to you.